This is AM Agenda. Thanks very much for your company. With me this morning, Liberal Senator Zed Seselja and Labor frontbencher Nick Champion. Let's look at the New South Wales election campaign now. Just a couple of days to go. Mike Baird, very popular, Senator Seselja, and so much so the Daily Telegraph, the front page, advertisement across the front page, just vote one for your local Baird Liberal, and a photograph of the Premier. A very different style of campaign to that of the Queensland LNP, where it was hard to find an image of Campbell Newman in the last week.
Well, we certainly hope it's a different campaign, because obviously we didn't win that one. So we want to see a win on Saturday, and I'm certainly very hopeful. Although I'm sure Mike Baird's not taking anything for granted. He'll be campaigning right until the end to try and make sure that he can get another 4 years to continue the strong path that the coalition has been on. I mean, they've really turned the state around. If you look at the economic indicators that were there 4 years ago and what we have now, Mike Baird and the coalition have done an outstanding job, and they certainly deserve to be re-elected, and I'm very hopeful that they will be.
He's popular. His policies, key policies, not so popular. If he wins on the weekend, is it a reminder, I guess, to politicians at every level that reform can be undertaken if it's communicated effectively?
Well, look, of course that would be one of the lessons, and I think he's done a very good job. I mean, there's been lies, absolute lies, and even Martin Ferguson, Michael Costa have called them lies from the unions and the Labor Party on privatisation. I've seen the numbers on, we've seen a lot of polls on what people think about privatisation. It is clearly, I think, the right policy, and when people are asked whether they support it, if you're going to get some serious infrastructure upgrades, which is what the New South Wales Coalition is offering, it does shift significantly. So I think many people will see through the lies. I think if Martin Ferguson calls them lies, if Michael Costa calls them lies, if Paul Keating says that privatisation is a good thing, then I think the Labor Party is on very, very shaky ground and is playing, one of the most dishonest campaigns I think we've seen in modern Australian history.
If it's not as dishonest as Senator Seselja says, which many people believe it is, but there seems a tinge of xenophobia in the campaign as well from some of the comments, some of the campaigning this week.
Look, the Liberal Party, and look, privatisation's always been one of those divisive issues, but if you come down to my electorate, a lot of people have had actually some experience with the privatisation of poles and wires, and I can tell you, it's not very popular. I think we're about 10 years on now, maybe a bit longer. People know that it equals higher prices and a less accountable system. Well, that's been the experience in my home state. And whatever you say, come down to South Australia, come down to Elizabeth, see what an average punter thinks. Don't worry about what all these other characters think.
Don't worry what the stats
actually
show.
Ask
Don't worry
the
what
end
the
user.
ACCC
Actually
shows.
ask the end user.
Yeah.
And you can get all the assurances in the world from, the top end of town, but if you're a user in South Australia, I can tell you the experience has not been pleasant at all. And every time I'm out in a shopping centre, if someone mentions the privatisation of the electricity sector, you just hear two things from the public. A great deal of regret that we ever sold a monopoly provider. And that's, it really is a policy debate. And we should have a policy debate on the facts.
Absolutely, right.
And if you have a policy debate on the facts, then nearly every time the Australian voter rejects options for privatisation.
This hasn't been on the facts.
Before we come back to Senator Seselja, the Race Discrimination Commissioner in New South Wales, Tim South Pominassi, has said that the union campaign is racist.
Well, I disagree with him, and I'll tell you why I disagree with him. It is perfectly legitimate to have a debate about, foreign investment in Australia, and you see it all the time. We've seen it in the real estate market just recently. I had a whole inquiry about it. It's perfectly legitimate to have these debates, provided that they're based on facts. And if you look at the South Australian experience, you've got an actual real life example.
Let's hear Senator
the Labor Party wants to take economic policy in this country back at least 25 years. If you look at the debates we had about privatisation in the early 90s, when we had a Labor government, selling the Commonwealth Bank, selling Qantas. I mean, does anyone think that when we sold Telstra, before we sold Telstra, that we were doing better when it came to the rate of calls. No, we weren't. We're getting cheaper calls now. We've seen electricity prices in New South Wales under public ownership go absolutely
Well, that's
through
because
the
you're
roof.
fattening the pig for privatisation.
Absolutely through the roof. No, that was under the former government. That was under the former Labor government. So we saw them go through the roof. It is clearly dishonest. Anyone who analyses this closely knows it is an absolute lie, and many on your own side are saying that it's a lie. It's
and that's
really
true. You've got
campaign.
Labor people also putting the boot into this campaign.
Absolutely.